My name is Robert Crease. I am professor of philosophy at Stony Brook University. I'm the chairman of the department right now.
Now, you have been to the G4G many times and written about them. First, let's start with your efforts to popularize or make better known G4G.
Well, I'm a columnist for Physics magazine. For 18 years now, I've written a column called Critical Point for Physics World magazine, which is kind of the British version of Physics Today. That is, if you're a physicist, you get this magazine. So I have a monthly column, and first of all, it gives me an appreciation for Gardner, because I can't believe that people write columns for as long as he did. But I've only done 18 years, but he did almost 25.
Mm-hmm.
And but I'm constantly on the lookout for interesting ideas. The column is called Critical Point, and it's about the philosophical, historical, intellectual background to physics. So interesting aspects of physics that you don't learn by just doing physics itself. So I'm on the lookout for ideas, as I said, and one day George Hart, who was also at Stony Brook, said, "Oh, you should come to this conference, G4G, in honor of Gardner." And I'd read a little bit of Gardner when I was a kid, but I took what George told me was fascinating, so I came to G4G and it blew my mind. So the first thing I did was write a column about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next one, I wrote a column about it for Physics World in 2008, if I remember right.
Yes.
Then in 2009, not wanting to do just another column about it, I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal about it. I think I wrote another column for the celebration of mind.
Yes.
And in 2000, I really liked the Dr. Matrix things. 2008 was lots of fun. 2009 was a little bit lame, and I thought, I could do that. So I offered to do one of the Dr. Matrix things in 2000 for the G4G10.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean G4G. I didn't mean 2009. I meant G4G9.
Thank you.
And in in G4G10, I offered to do Dr. Matrix Pro 10, and I thought I'd do it with my son. So my son came. I think he was 8 years old at the time, and he came and did it and with me, and it was lots of fun. So he did it in G4G11, we did Pro 11,
mm-hmm.
and just to switch, we switched with Bruce Olberg, and he did Dr. Matrix Pro 12, and we did Anti-12. And he was supposed to come this year, but he had another engagement that he had to go to. So I did Pro 13 all by myself.
All by yourself, no Con 13?
No, there was a Con 13.
Yeah.
Colin Wright did Con 13, and it was fabulous. It was lots of fun.
Yes. Well, Scott Morris, I think, started that tradition of pros and cons.
And how long did you do that?
I don't know. I have records, I just don't know.
Did it start all the way with one?
No.
Oh.
Let's go on. So you didn't come for the math per se. You didn't come for other things. You just came before the sort of the gestalt of the conference.
I came for the play.
The play.
It's the most disciplinarily diverse conference I've ever been to, and the most fun conference. As I wrote in one of the things that I've written, it's a conference. You wonder what all these people have in common, from logicians to magicians, and what they all have in common is that they like to solve puzzles. They like to create and solve puzzles. And sort of intellectually, philosophically, I'm interested in the notion of play and creativity. And so here we have this kind of palette of play going on for 4 days.
As a philosopher and or educator, what do you think the value of play is?
That's a big question, but the play is thinking. Play is how we play is creativity, and here we have people coming not just to advance their own professional careers, but to figure out how to play better. It's sort of like again, as I described it in another article, it's like coming to a conference of hobbyists, that all they have is the spirit of being a hobbyist, of trying out stuff, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and you may not be interested in or even able to grasp all of these talks, but there are many things you pick up that are useful for your own work.
Yeah. Now that you're here, you know that Gardner was a philosopher.
Yes.
And that probably wasn't the reason you came, but now that you've encountered Gardner and philosophy, and of course your background in that is very, very strong, are you thinking that maybe philosophy should be discussed more here? Do you think that is an aspect that is just pushed to the periphery and we just concentrate on the play?
Absolutely. I think philosophy should have a bigger presence here, although maybe in a different form. That is, a large part of Martin's work had to do with pseudoscience and attacking pseudoscience, and many of his books were about. It was actually partly the subject of my talk today. Mm-hmm. He wrote a lot about pseudoscience, and it was important to him to expose and to point out the flaws in pseudoscience. So that was a very important part of his work, and to do that effectively, you have to have a firm grasp of the philosophy of science. So I think that ought to be a bigger part here. And over the years, it seemed to be less and less. There was only my talk and a talk I just heard about pseudoscience here.
I would agree with you. I probably should be part of the solution and do that more myself. I talked about his literary work, but I understand. But real philosophy probably would not be appropriate here. Real philosophy has a... What I'm trying to get to is, real philosophy, in my mind, is a dry academic activity.
No.
And not a playful activity for this environment. Is it possible for there to be a good intersection of those two fields?
Oh, absolutely. And I think pseudoscience is a perfect example of where those two fields could intersect. I mean, a lot of his columns had to do with pseudoscience. Well, actually, I'm just winging it, but I suppose, but you would know his columns.
In Skeptical Inquiry, you wrote a column for over 20 years on it.
That's right, in Skeptical Inquiry, yes. But that's a field where, I mean, it's easy, again, as my talk was this afternoon, it's easy to say that pseudoscience and science denial is something stupid and it's completely irrational, and the people who do it just are idiots or out for votes or money and so forth. But to actually see what fuels it, what motivates it, and therefore how to combat it, you have to understand a lot about science and science's own vulnerabilities. Because as I argued today, some of the things that make science strong, that is the fact that groups of people do it, and that it's fallible, constantly open to revision, and that it challenges existing values. The very same features of science that make it vulnerable to science denial. And without those features, science denial, no matter how much money you had, it wouldn't work. So the very strengths of science leave it open to science denial and pseudoscience. So to be able to address that and to expose that is at the intersection of philosophy and science, as you mentioned. Does that answer your question?
Yes. One thing that people really don't appreciate about Martin Gardner is that he studied philosophy much more than he wrote about it. Because the reason he studied philosophy is he wanted the answers. Okay, he did not do it as a preamble to writing an article. He wanted to know the answers. And ever since he started it in college, I mean, he really wanted to know. And he was sort of upset with his fellow students because they were just viewing it as a major. And he said in class once, when the professor asked, "Why are you here?" he says, "I want to know the answers." And everybody laughed at him. Now, you are in academia. How do you view people's interest in philosophy? Do they have this kind of mindedness or something else?
That's an interesting question. I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I mean, for me, philosophy is not about getting the answers. it's reverse. It's stepping back and asking new kinds of questions. I mean, a philosopher typically, if take something that seems obvious and ask questions about, whoa, is it really that obvious? And so they step back rather than trying to go forward. So philosophy to me is learning how to think and learning how to question. And it's very frustrating for people who want answers. But if what you want is answers, then you really shouldn't do philosophy.
Well, he's interested in, he steps back all the time. And his book, Whys of a Philosophical Scrivener,
Yes.
is every chapter is why I am not this, why I am not that. Because he's used to stepping back.
Yes, and that's philosophical. I mean, I see a lot more philosophy in someone like him can look like they aren't doing philosophy, but it's his philosophical training, which is all over in the background of those books and essays.
To him, the most important question was, what is free will? This obsessed him his entire life. And he led him to read hundreds and if not thousands of books. And his conclusion, which I don't know if is original to him or not, but he stated it like it was a fact, that free will and consciousness are just two names for the same thing. So that was, if that's an original thought, then he should put his name on it. But regardless, the point is that was a central question in his intellectual life. So, do you have anything to say about this general kind of question?
I have lots to say, but it's way too long for a short interview.
No. Just whether he was wasting his time on this, or whether this is an appropriate question to center your life upon, in your opinion.
Yeah, because the question is how do you live? How should we live? That's a deep philosophical question, and basically the question of what is consciousness, and is consciousness identical to free will? That's connected with this.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a deep philosophical issue.
He was a Mysterian, a term that I found is not in the dictionary, so I have to define it for people, even though you may know what it means. I'll define it for you as a Mysterian is somebody for which science is the vehicle for learning truth, but we will always be ignorant of certain things.
I know a little bit about it, and what's fascinating to me is that a lot of Martin Gardner fans just assumed that he was an atheist.
Yes.
You know, he had to be an atheist because he knew so much science and math. And the fact that he was a Mysterian and not an atheist, not only that, but a committed non-atheist, I
Yes.
mean, he made no bones about it, mystifies people, and I'd like to learn more about that. I don't know enough. I assume I'll learn more when I read your book.
Well, I'm hoping that somebody, before I write my book, will write another book called What a Mysterian Is, because I just get the definition from, touching various things.
Triangulating,
because it's not I'd like to make sure that the philosophy community has their own definition that I can compare and contrast.
I don't. There's no general definition of a Mysterian. I mean, it's not agnostic either.
No.
It
It has nothing to do with the limits of science, though. It's not so much the supernatural. It's the acknowledgement that science will always only push back the frontiers and will never answer all questions.
Yeah, like an ocean, that you can make the ocean recede a little bit, but the ocean is already going to be there. The world is infinitely richer than the concepts and language that we use to approach it and try to grasp it.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with that.
I agree with that.
There's no final theory is another way of putting it. By the way, are there other Mysterians? I mean, was there a community of Mysterians?
I have a handful listed at home. The one that comes to mind is Noam Chomsky, for example. He's an acknowledged Mysterian and uses that word.
And who was the first person to use it?
I don't know that. As I said, it's very hard to research because it's not a dictionary word, and I will send you, and maybe we can correspond about this.
I would love to.
Off camera.
Yeah,
but I'd love to
yes.
know more about it as well. Especially you probably have contacts that I don't have. And this could be profitable, so I'd be happy
And
to.
we could talk about a G4G13 if.
There you go. That would please me.
If we find something, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because, as I said, what is shocking to me is the community just assumes that Martin Gardner was an atheist, and he wasn't, and they can't fit that into their understanding of Martin Gardner, the fact that he wasn't.
There are many, many letters I've seen in his files in which he just has a paragraph at the bottom, and oh, by the way, when you said I was an atheist, that's not true, I'm a philosophical theist, and then he goes a couple more lines. He didn't let the atheist brand go unanswered. He would always correct people about that, and not in a big way, but he just wanted to make sure that it wasn't assumed of
I
him.
suspect it's connected with his dislike of McKeon. I mean, there's something very mechanical and impersonal about McKeon's approach to philosophical thinking, and I don't know how it is right now, but I suspect that there's a connection between those two positions.
Let's talk about the Chicago School, to the extent that you're willing to talk about it. The Chicago School of Philosophy in the 30s, which is where Gardner studied. And a lot of those people are names now that have become adjectives. The McKeon School and so forth. Like Hartshorne, for example, was a very important philosopher for him while he was there. Do you know much about the lasting influence of the Chicago School?
Well, actually, at Stony Brook, when I first arrived at Stony Brook in 1987, there were a few teachers there who had graduated gotten their PhDs from the Chicago School, and had studied with McKeon. And the influence was that you knew your history of philosophy backwards and forwards. They were very solid at being able to understand how, a lot of philosophers are interested in specific ideas, truth or beauty or courage or ethics and so forth. But at the Chicago School, what they taught you was how to analyze positions. They saw philosophy as consisting of positions, that there was Spinozist, there was Kant, there was Husserlian phenomenology, there was Aristotelian, and you learned each of those and how to compare and contrast. And so to get a sense of different philosophical systems, so the strength of the Chicago School was to give you a grasp of different philosophical systems and how to compare and contrast them. You could ask someone, well, what is emotion, or what is an affect? And they'd be able to say, well, for Spinoza it's this, for Kant it's this, and so forth. And so that kind of distance way of stepping back as if philosophy were a series of museums of positions and be able to compare and contrast, that was the strength of the Chicago School. And that, of course, is precisely what drove Gardner crazy, because he wanted the answer.
He wanted answers, right.
He didn't want to go to a museum and see different artifacts. He wanted to use that to understand nature better.
Well, to show how much he wanted to know, after these people died, he wrote to their widows to ask what they believed, because they would not tell him what they believed. And it was very important to him that he understood what people believed.
And what did they answer? Do you have a collection of their answers?
The wives professed to not know. But that's the level that he was at. He wanted to know what people believed. He could not be happy if you sat on the fence. I mean, he just didn't believe you if you sat on the fence. He believed you actually had a belief and you weren't admitting it. And McKeon drove him crazy. Because he wouldn't say anything was better than anything else.
I can understand that. I can understand the frustration. On the other hand, McKeon was wonderful as far as training goes, because what McKeon would do is teach you how to look at a problem like truth or beauty or courage or ethics or something from different perspectives, and to see how what you saw depended on your perspective. And that's a deep philosophical idea.
Yes. When he was interviewed at his exit interview at Chicago, they asked him who his favorite philosopher was. And his answer was Bertrand Russell. And they asked why. And he said, to the best of my knowledge, Bertrand Russell was the only philosopher who ever changed his mind, admitted he was wrong. And so that sort of a negative implication on the Chicago School, that he couldn't get anybody to admit they were ever wrong about anything. They would.
See, that sort of leads me to think he viewed philosophy as being like a science, where it's a set of, it's inquiry, but he viewed it as like getting data. But what you just said was interesting to me. So there's an exit interview? What did you mean exit interview?
I apologize. I wanted to shorten this discussion. He had an interview for membership in Phi Beta Kappa.
Ah, and you have that interview?
What he's told me about it. I know what happened there. So, but it wasn't recorded or anything. It's 1936. Ah. And but that's. I just wanted to get your reaction to his assessment, which I've already gotten. So that's good. Let's talk about Karl Popper. Not Karl Popper. Carnap. Let's talk about Carnap, the arch nemesis of Karl Popper. Now, Gardner was influenced by Carnap because he took some courses from Carnap. Gardner never called himself was it logical positivist?
Yeah.
Is that the term? He never called himself that, but he was definitely influenced by Carnap. Most people don't know that the book that Gardner's associated with, he actually wrote that book.
He mentions that in his
the introduction to
right?
the introduction to physics or something like that.
Yeah.
The philosophy of logic. Doesn't matter what the title is. We'll cut this out. The point here is that Gardner got his wife, Carnap's wife, to record the lectures, and then Gardner took the tapes and made them into something that could be understood by everybody else. So it was not a transcript. It's his own interpretation of the lectures.
Yeah, I think, doesn't he say in the autobiography, every thought is Carnap's and every word is mine?
Exactly.
Something like that.
So the point still is that he clearly was influenced by Carnap. Now, what is the modern view of Carnap's contribution?
I really do not feel comfortable answering that question for several reasons. One of which is I don't know enough about Carnap, and but also that philosophy comes in various traditions, various groups of inquirers who have different starting points, and where your starting point is will depend on what your attitude towards Carnap is. Okay. So, I mean, I'm sorry, I have to say it's a long story.
It's a long story. Well, I do know that...
I will send you, if you want, I have recently I wrote something for Physics World. It's a 20-page condensation of the philosophy of physics from my point of view, but I start out with describing different traditions, analytic tradition, pragmatic tradition, and phenomenological tradition, and how you view Carnap depends on which one you belong to.
Okay. Well, I can tell you the other two people who influenced him were Popper, but sometimes in a negative way, and he was also influenced by Quine a great deal. And so those are the three people that I will look for in your article.
Okay.
All right. All right. Let's see if we can get back on topic for G4G. When you leave here, what are you going to take back to your students, if anything? Is there any direct, anything
Yes.
you're going to take back to your students?
Well, several things. First of all, I brought some of my students here.
Oh.
So I brought, well, I made sure a colleague of mine who's a logician and who likes games and Gardner, and started reading Gardner when he was like 4 years old. I made sure that he came. I also brought a graduate student of mine named Delicia Kamens, who's been around, and an undergraduate who's very interested in the game of life and developed some elaborations of it. I'm just sorry he didn't get to meet Conway, but they're all brilliant people. So I brought some people here, but in terms of what I take back, well, first of all, I'm teaching a course called Philosophical Engineering, and I say that I tell my students it's everything you should read in engineering class, but don't. And so it's not just how to build things, but how to play with things, the role of play, how play shapes our experience, how engineering projects involve linkages of things, not just objects, but linkages of things. So, and as part of it, I have them build something they have to design it and build it themselves, and it's an imaginative project. It's sort of like the game Mousetrap.
Yes.
Basically, I have them do a big mousetrap. Each person builds a piece. We put all the pieces together. Last day of class, this flow of energy happens. So one of the things I'm bringing back from this is I run into lots of people who've done something like that, and I borrow their ideas.
Good.
So the guy who just spoke, I've forgotten his name, about build the little plastic gears and engines and so forth.
Yes.
I brought that. There are other things that I've been collecting, little puzzle type things that I've been. The person who built the Jacob's ladder unfolding thing. What was his name yesterday?
I don't remember.
Ikea something.
Yes.
I thought my students will love that, so I'm going to bring back that idea. So with Delicia Cammons, who is my TA, we're assembling things to playful devices to bring back that my students will love. So that's one thing. There are other. I have several ideas. Every time I come, I have several ideas for columns. So not just writing about G4G, but things that I found out here. I meet people who I will be talking to over the next few years and writing more columns about and contacting. I mean, such as yourself about this Carnap issue. So,
yes, indeed. Well, hope I will meet you more in the future, and I'm glad we have this real life example of the success of G4G doing what it's supposed to do.
Yes, absolutely. As I say, it's the most disciplinarily diverse conference that I have ever run into, and the most fun. You know, the key point. One of the key points was here's a Gardner moment. So we get back from Decatur last night, and sitting around drinking downstairs in the bar, and Colin Wright says, "Oh, did you know that the ISS, International Space Station, is about to fly over this area, and we could probably see it from here?" And I said, "How do you know that?" So he shows me the website, and we figure it out, and about a dozen of us run out in front, and we figure it's visible between those two buildings, and then it'll be hidden, and then those two buildings, and sure enough, it appears at exactly the right time, 9:15 p.m., passes between two buildings, then over there. And that's like a Gardner moment, when just a little bit of knowledge about the world makes you feel more connected to it, and makes you feel like you understand it more and that you appreciate it more. So that's the kind of experience that always happens when I come here.
Very good. I think we should end on that note.
Okay,
Thank you
good.
very much.
Thanks.